Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We are proud to present our next speakers, Pierre Dorian and Girish Daj with Sungard AS. Please give them a warm welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. A wonderful floor. So we're going to talk about resilience with AWS, right? Before we jump into that, I'm going to start with Sungard AS and the partnership that we have with AWS. Who we are. We are an Amazon advanced consulting partner. We are a managed services partner as well. And we also are storage competency certified. We have been in the business for about 40 years. We resonate everything with resiliency and recovery. We've been doing that for 40 years, and that's what we have built our experience on. Our core values stand for accountability, initiative, integrity, teamwork, and respect. That's what we deliver across all our solutions and services. We have been industry recognized as a leader with disaster recovery. We've been, as I said, we've been doing that for 40 years, and that's the expertise that we have built. We support a lot of customers across the portfolio. We have customers across the insurance industry, the healthcare, the technology segment. So we support them from both sides, be it a managed services provider or be it as a disaster recovery as a service. What we deliver in AWS particularly. So when we started our journey with AWS, we were looking at, hey, you know what? If we deliver disaster recovery as a service to a Sungard data center, why can't we do that on AWS? Think about it. It's the perfect use case. And that's where we started building our practice. We started building with resiliency and our consulting services practice of helping customers build AWS or on top of AWS. We also have managed AWS recovery services. We have offerings which deliver a recovery time objective SLA on top of AWS. So this supports AWS to AWS as well as on-prem to AWS recovery. We are also a managed services provider or a partner from an AWS perspective. So we support customers hosted on top of AWS from a fully managed perspective. We also recently launched a service which offers customers the best of both worlds. We offer managed backup services which help customers do on-prem backups into AWS. That's what we have as a full gamut of services. Now, if you think about it, it's very difficult, and everybody has been into a cloud journey. Today, what we are going to talk about is the journey that everybody is embarking on towards cloud. And what does that include? And that's, I'll hand over to Pierre, and he'll take us through that journey into what everybody is experiencing. Pierre, to you.
Thank you so much, Girish. Hi, folks. As we work with different organizations, we find that everyone is somewhere along the road to a cloud resiliency or cloud-based resiliency journey. Leaders are pressed with business drivers to contain or reduce cost. Also to manage and mitigate risk, because that's always a top priority here, and develop structures for ongoing management and agility. Go ahead. So, as we start this journey, people begin to develop a basic awareness of the cloud, that there's solutions out there that support resiliency, that their peers are implementing cloud-based strategies. And soon enough, thank you. Soon enough, they recognize that there's a business need for this. Business owners start wanting high availability with little to no tolerance for downtime. And they want to see maybe increased agility to support new markets or new customers. The the infrastructure owners may be facing aging hardware or hardware that's reaching end of life. And you know what happens when infrastructure ages, you start needing backup nodes for your presentations. So sometimes you need a major upgrade. Maybe some of the infrastructure owners are looking for an alternative to a costly hardware refresh. The application owners demand a flexible environments that can scale up or down. And of course, the board and the stakeholders want this all at a reduced cost with a higher return on investment. They want to be able to adapt quickly to market changes. Or maybe they're trying to support acquisition ambitions that they have. You can go ahead. This moves people to early adoption or initial adoption, where certain critical workloads are identified as needing increased resiliency. Maybe hardware is also retired at that point. Application suite are containerized or re-architected for AWS resiliency. At this stage, you typically would involve experts or partners that are skilled in the AWS architecture, design, or security. And at this point, you have a formalized program that starts taking shape to integrate with appropriate policies, security, compliance, and so on and so forth. Dedicated key infrastructure staff start providing inputs and thought leadership into a transformation plan that will address all the organizational changes, and that includes the business changes, roles and responsibilities, architecture, design, security, operations, training, so on and so forth. At any rate, at this stage, it really becomes an early adoption only. Process development, tools and automation implementation, reporting and whatnot. And of course, now the budgets are also aligned with the OpEx model that is typical to utility computing, which is cloud. And you're starting to see some cost benefits and return on investment. This brings us, you can go ahead and click. This brings us to a point where finally the organization as a whole reaches a higher level of cloud resilience maturity. Now it expands and sets into a more steady state resiliency mode, where now you have technical operational foundations in place to effectively and efficiently migrate applications. During this stage, the building blocks are put in place to develop a transformation plan for the migration. And during this phase also, the mass migration of all applications in scope is completed. So really at this point now, you're really embracing the cloud and you're starting to work all the workloads that you had flagged into the cloud. Now you have a resiliency strategy in place that minimizes risks of project failure at the same time, because you've built these capabilities, or this is part of the journey anyways. This is what you should do. Application workloads are now classified and sequenced, and there is a built-in resiliency that will at least enable you to meet certain scenarios, failure scenarios. Okay, so now that we have an established AWS recovery or resiliency environment in place, it's sustainable and reliable and enables improved agility, including leveraging existing tools and processes. Now you're at a point where you can start trying to relax a little bit, or maybe not really. Now this is a time where you've implemented that. Now you need to start optimizing and streamlining. So you're looking at fine-tuning your environment. This is where all targeted applications, workloads are equipped with resiliency within AWS. And the whole approach, framework, and validation process is now efficiently managed. And we talked about this phase, as much as we've portrayed this as a road, it is actually not a destination, but it's really a loop, or call it a program. So this is not something that you're done and you can actually say, hey, I'm done here. The focus is now on continuous service improvements that will enable you to realize the true value of AWS resiliency, and the value of AWS, you drive it deeper into your organization. So continuous service improvement will enable you to realize that true value. And also to continue to drive costs down and increase performance efficiencies. So when we talk about reaching a healthy state of resiliency, or a mature resiliency posture, what does that look like? Because that's what we're talking about here. What are some of the fundamental components? I'm going to skip something. So what are some of the fundamental components or indicators of relative health? Remember that what we talked about in the beginning here are business drivers. So we need at the very basic level to make sure that the business drivers are met. This includes cost containment. It includes that the applications are now resilient, and you can meet a variety of scenarios. Now you have a solid program in place that has policies, governance, and metrics. The policies and frameworks need to be appropriately integrate with the existing pillars in the organization, and that could be security, compliance, governance, and whatnot. Beyond that, the ongoing optimization and proactive monitoring is essential. Okay. Sorry, folks, I got my notes mixed up.
So before we talk about that, right? So basically what we have done is here, if you look at AWS Application Resiliency Health Check, we've introduced something like, if you come to our booth on 2614 booth number, you'll see we have a 10-question based health check assignment, where you can understand where you are in your journey, and based on a score, you could look at where you stand in your journey towards AWS or towards a public cloud environment. Because it's not about, as Andy Jesse as well pointed out, or yesterday's in a keynote, they pointed out, it's not about what you started spending. It's all about how do you optimize the spend in an OpEx model. And that's where we have put it up as a health check, which is available on our website, as well as you could come to our booth on 2614 and do the health check. This talks about where you stand from a health check perspective on your journey towards AWS. The AWS health check is talking about things like where you are in your journey, where you are in your journey perspective, what your resiliency stands, where does your organization fit in an overall perspective, and that's what we talk about in our booth as well. Now, what better way to explain AWS than talk about customer examples in how we have helped our customers achieve resiliency in various aspects of their journey. To talk about that, the first example that I bring here is of a very well-known candy brand in North America. This customer had a very typical problem. What happened was they were on their AWS journey, and suddenly there was a new manufacturing plant that came up in Asia. Now they were struggling with two priorities in focus. Their focus was, hey, you know what, we need to get production in AWS. The second focus was, hey, you know what, we need to make sure that the manufacturing plant that is being set up there needs to have a resilient posture. We don't want anything to go wrong and lose a whole bunch of data. That's where we came in and we helped the customer building an on-prem to AWS disaster recovery strategy. We helped the customer understand what their environment consisted of. The customer had identified three particular gaps. One was lack of focus on disaster recovery as a whole. Second, their teams had never performed an end-to-end disaster recovery test. They were never gone through that. And the third was they were always lacking of focus and skills on top of AWS. So though they had their bold initiative to embrace cloud, they looked at us and said, how can you help us? That's where we worked with them and said, hey, you know what, as a first step, let's explore if you can build your disaster recovery strategy on top of AWS. Now this gives them immediate availability of resources when they wanted, wherever they wanted, across the globe. So that's the first thing. With reducing your risk, lowering your risk, you're able to use AWS infrastructure on the go. It's fully elastic. You can spin it up and spin it down whenever you want it. The second was because it was AWS, they are able to achieve a very fast recovery time objective. Our service was bundled with a recovery time objective SLA, which meant that they had a guaranteed recovery time objective SLA. That meant that if anything would happen, they would have their environment up and running in a set number of hours or 4 hours on top of AWS. Third, with AWS, it was lower cost. There was no second data center requirement. There was no second set of infrastructure requirement. And that ultimately meant it was lower cost. And that's what we delivered for our customer. Moving to our next example, and again, hey, you know what? A global honey manufacturer. So now you know I love sweets, so that's what we talk about. Two examples. One was the candy manufacturer. The second is a honey manufacturer. So here, the customer's example, we talk about what happened with them was they were hosted on in a colo data center, and their colo provider was hit by a ransomware attack. And it could happen to anybody of us. And the customer's business was down for 2 weeks. No fault of theirs. It was the colo provider. And the customer went through a whole shift in collaboration and trying to think, consulting engagement, trying to say, hey, where should we host so we don't go into this problem again? Because their job or focus was not on making IT run. Though they sold these honey cans online or through Amazon and through wholesale models like Whole Foods and others, their job was to make sure that the factory manufactures honey. So they moved and they asked for Sungard AS help. And that's where, through a collaborative session, we first did one thing that was important for them is we did a discovery session with them, where we helped them understand what does their infrastructure actually consist of? What are their application dependencies? Where do they need help? And what kind of AWS resources do they need for that kind of environment? So through a collaborative approach, we helped engage with the customer. We helped them understand what their environment was, and then built that environment on top of AWS. It was an SAP implementation on top of AWS, and we fully manage the SAP infrastructure basis for them. With that being there, the customer was able to focus back their attention on what was important for their customers, what was important for their manufacturing facility. This led to two benefits for the customer. One, revenue was faster because being on AWS, it had a 99.99% SLA. Our service, Managed Cloud AWS, comes with an SLA that is backed for reliability around it. So that meant that they did not have a risk of running into issues that they had experienced earlier. The second was there was no revenue lack due to cyber attacks. This was being an experience that I had already experienced. We built a security posture around their entire cloud infrastructure so that they are not susceptible to the same attack again. So this is where AWS and Sungard AS help the customer leverage the power of elasticity, visibility, and security on top of an AWS cloud environment. Moving to my last slide, I want to talk about Sungard AS focused solution portfolio, AWS focused portfolio. So if you heard about us, what we talked about, we have 3 services that help customers with leveraging AWS power. One of them, on the rightmost side, is the production services, which helps customer host managed infrastructure on top of AWS. We help customers with a 99.99% availability SLA on top of AWS infrastructure. Backup. We have a service offering that includes managed backup AWS. With this service, we help our customers achieve the best of both worlds. So the customer gets a local appliance for backups. We do that with a 98% backup SLA. And we also replicate all of those backups to AWS. All of this is backed with a 98% backup SLA so that the customer can focus on what is critical for their production IT infrastructure workload. The third, but not least, is going to be the cloud recovery AWS business. Excuse me. We have a cloud recovery AWS business, which helps customers from an on-prem workload perspective reuse AWS infrastructure as recovery target. Or we also help customers go from one AWS region to another AWS region. All of this is done with a 4-hour recovery time objective SLA. Excuse me. So, as you know, as we talked about, we have leveraged what is best on AWS, the scalability, the elasticity, the availability of AWS, and that's what we have offered for our customers, and we have backed that with our service SLAs, so customers can focus on their production or business application requirements. That's what Sungard Availability Services stands for. Thank you, everybody.
And just in closing here, folks, before we leave, we've developed a quick health check, a resilience health check assessment that helps you gauge how you're doing and potentially identify gaps in your approach to AWS Resiliency. So if you can come visit us at the booth, 2614, that's the Sungard AS booth, or you can take the test online and you'll get kind of a score that shows you where you're doing today and where you probably need to address some of the gaps here. So welcome to come and talk to us live at the booth or do it online. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you.